He's finally out of the way. That was the first thing my daughter said after my stroke. Not a doctor. Not a prayer. My own girl standing close enough that I could smell her perfume, sounding almost relieved. They thought I couldn't hear them. For 11 days they planned my funeral, divided up my life, and finished tearing apart a family I'd spent 40 years holding together. They said every cruel, true thing they'd never had the nerve to say to my face, because they were certain the man who used to live in this body was gone for good. They were wrong about one thing. The stroke took my voice, my right hand, and my legs. It left my ears working perfectly. So I lay there, unable to move, unable to make a sound, and I finally learned the truth about the people I'd given everything to. My name is Eugene Whitaker. People call me Gene. I'm 67 years old, and this is the story of the 11 days I spent listening to my family bury a man who was still breathing. But it starts before the hospital. It starts with my son. Daniel and I lost each other 10 years ago. I never understood how. 1 year we were close, and then the calls got shorter, and then they stopped, until we were two strangers who shared a last name and a stiff 3-minute phone call every Christmas. I spent 10 years certain it was my fault, that I'd been too quiet a father, too hard to talk to, that I'd done some quiet damage I couldn't even name. The morning of my stroke, I was standing in my kitchen with my phone in my hand, and his name was on the screen. It was a Tuesday in March, no reason, no occasion. I just woke up missing my boy so badly I could hardly breathe, the way I did most mornings and never told anyone. I typed out a message. "Daniel, it's Dad. I'd love to hear your voice." I read it 4 times, and then I deleted it, the way I deleted it 100 times before, because the last time I reached out he hadn't answered, and an old man can only have his heart broken by the same silence so many times before he stops offering it up. That was the last thing I did as a whole man. I put down the phone unsent. I reached for Eleanor's old coffee mug, the one with the chip in it, and the floor came up to meet me. I lay on that linoleum for 2 hours awake, screaming inside a body that wouldn't answer, until the mail carrier saw me through the screen door. And the cruelest joke of it, the one I didn't understand yet, is that I spent those 2 hours grieving a son I thought had abandoned me. I had it exactly backwards. I just had to lose my voice to finally hear the truth. I could think. I could see the ceiling tiles and hear the machines. But when I tried to lift my hand, nothing happened. When I tried to say help me, my mouth made a sound that wasn't a word, a low, broken thing that scared me, coming out of my own throat. The doctor stood at the foot of my bed and talked over me like I was furniture. They said the next days would tell. They said the family should prepare for a range of outcomes. They said sometimes the speech comes back, and sometimes it doesn't. And my family heard, sometimes it doesn't, and they decided. I'll tell you who they were as we go, because that's how I learned it myself in pieces over 11 days. But you need to know 2 names going in. Rachel, my daughter. My favorite. I'm not proud of it, but I'm done lying, so there it is. From the time she was small, Rachel knew exactly how to make me feel like the most important man alive, and I paid for it gladly my whole life, college, her wedding, the lawyer for her divorce, the down payment on her house out of an account I'd saved 30 years to fill. I gave Rachel everything, and I called the warmth she gave back love. And Maria, my daughter-in-law, the one my family decided didn't belong from the day my son married her. They called her a gold digger, which was a strange thing to call a woman who married into a family with no gold. After my wife Eleanor passed 4 years ago, Maria was the only person who called me on Sundays just to ask if I'd eaten. She'd show up with a pot of something her grandmother used to make and sit at my table and listen to an old man grieve for hours, and she never once asked me for a thing. 2 women. Remember them both, because over 11 days one of them passed a test she didn't know she was taking, and the other one failed it in a way I could never have imagined. Day 2. That's when I heard the house come up. Rachel was in the hallway with her husband, just outside the door, where they thought the distance made them private. It didn't. Those doors are thin, and a man who can't move learns to listen the way a blind man learns to hear. There was nothing else for me to do, hour after hour, but listen. She was talking about my house, the small house outside Pittsburgh where I'd lived 39 years, where Eleanor and I raised our kids, where her chair still sat by the window. Rachel was asking her husband whether they could get it listed before all the legal business is finished, just to get ahead of it. She said the worst part of all this was to be going through all his junk. My life? Eleanor's things. 39 years called junk in a hospital hallway while I lay 8 feet away. Then she said the thing that started something hardening in me that had only been cooling before. She said she'd already stopped by the house. She said she'd taken Eleanor's ring, her mother's wedding ring, the one I slipped off Eleanor's hand myself the night she died and kept in a velvet box in my sock drawer for the nights the house got too quiet. Rachel said she'd secured it before it walked off. She said she figured she'd earned it, being the daughter, being the one who deals with everything. I lay there and felt my wife's ring leave my house in my daughter's purse, and I could not move one finger to stop it. Day 3. I learned they already had a story, and they were practicing it. Rachel's husband asked her, in the room low, what they were going to tell people, and Rachel answered like she'd thought about it for a while. We'd tell everyone we did everything we could, that we were here around the clock, that the doctor said there was no hope and we had to be strong and make the hard choices nobody wants to make. She said it smoothly. The whole script, the grieving, devoted daughter who'd sat vigil at her father's side. The performance she'd to give at the funeral she was already planning. I lay there and listened to my daughter rehearse her own eulogy for me, and the kindest line in it was a lie. Then she said something to her teenage kids, my grandchildren, who'd been brought to say goodbye. She told them, gently, that Grandpa wasn't really in there anymore, that the man they remembered was gone and this was just his body now, and that it was okay to feel relieved, because relief was natural. She was teaching them to grieve a man who was lying there, hearing every word she said. She was teaching my own grandchildren to look at me and see a corpse. And that same afternoon, I heard her on the phone with a realtor. Not after, during. She was scheduling a walkthrough of my house, my home of 39 years, for that very weekend. That very weekend. Just so we're ready to move quick, she said. No, he won't mind. He won't mind. The realtor would be walking through Eleanor's kitchen, past her chair by the window, while I lay in this bed with my eyes open and my ears working, and no way on God's earth to say a single word about it. Day 4. I thought day 2 was the bottom. Day 4 taught me there is no bottom. A doctor came in, a kind, tired man named Dr. Ussay, and gathered the family to talk about what he called the long road. Months of recovery, maybe. Hard decisions about care. And I heard my daughter ask a question in a careful, gentle, reasonable voice. She asked whether, given my age and my quality of life, it might be more humane not to pursue aggressive measures. She asked about a do not resuscitate order. She said the word humane 3 times. She was asking the doctor to let me die. 8 feet from my working ears, my favorite child was building the case for my death and calling it mercy. And I wanted to live. I wanted to live so badly. The wanting was the loudest thing in that room, and not one of them could hear it. It was Maria who stopped her. Maria, who had no legal standing, who was just a daughter-in-law nobody respected. She said, "No, it's been 4 days. The doctor just said months. You don't get to decide he's gone because waiting is hard." Rachel talked over her in that reasonable voice, and Maria turned to Dr. Ussay and said, "I've been here every day. There is somebody still in there, and I will not stand in this room while we talk about giving up on a living man." And Dr. Ussay looked at me a long moment, and then he said he saw no medical reason to discuss such things yet, and he left. He didn't know it, but he just sided with the only person who'd bet on me. And my daughter had shown me on day 4 exactly how far she was willing to go. Not just to wait for me to die, to help it along and to call it dignity. Day 5. She came with papers. I heard them rustle before I understood what they were. Rachel pulled the bedside tray over and set them down and said to her husband, "Curtis won't move on the accounts without authorization, so we do it the simple way. He can still hold a pen if I guide his hand. The doctor said there might be reflex movement. That's all a signature is." And I felt her lift my dead right hand, the one that wouldn't answer me, and fold my fingers around a pen, and press the tip to the paper, and start to move my own hand to sign away the power of attorney to herself. My hand, my name, forged with my own fingers while I lay there screaming inside a body that wouldn't scream. I have never been so helpless in my life. Not before. Not since. My own hand being used as a tool against me, and the only thing I could do was lie there and let it happen. And then the door opened and Maria's voice said, "What are you doing?" The pen stopped. Rachel set my hand down too fast and said something bright about just keeping his things organized, but Maria had seen it. She crossed the room and picked up the papers off the tray and looked at them, and her face changed, and she said very quietly, "This is a power of attorney. You were moving his hand to sign a power of attorney." And Rachel said it wasn't what it looked like, and Maria said, "It's exactly what it looks like." And she took the papers with her out of that room, and she did not give them back. I found out later she made copies before she returned the originals to Patricia Vance, my lawyer, with a note. Maria was building my case before I even knew I'd need one. Day 6. This is the one that didn't break my heart so much as rearrange it. Rachel was in the hallway again with her husband, and they were talking about my son, about Daniel. The boy I'd spent 10 years missing every single morning, the one whose unsent message was still sitting on my phone in a drawer in this very room. And then, on day 6, in that hallway, I heard Rachel say to her husband, word for word, "We need to handle this before Daniel gets involved. After everything I did to keep them apart, I'm not letting it go to him now. After everything I did to keep them apart." The whole last decade turned itself inside out in front of me. The unreturned calls I thought were his. The colder and colder Christmases. The things I'd heard he said about me, that I was a cold and distant failure, that he was ashamed of where he came from, that he didn't want his kids around me. And the things he'd been told I said, that his wife was beneath us, that his marriage was an embarrassment, that I was done with him if he stayed with her. All of it had come to each of us in Rachel's voice. "Dad told me to tell you," Daniel said to tell you, for 10 years my daughter had carried poison in both directions, a patient ferryman keeping a father and son apart, so that on a day exactly like this one, there'd be no son standing in the way of what she wanted. I had lost my son to my daughter's ambition, and I'd thanked her for her warmth while she did it. I'd handed her that down payment in the very year she was stealing my boy, day 7, and then I heard her do it again, live in real time. My son came to the hospital. Daniel came. After 10 years and everything between us, he heard his father was dying, and he got in his car, and he came. I didn't know it was happening until I heard his voice down the hall, asking a nurse for my room number, and my heart, the one part of me that still worked at full strength, nearly came out of my chest. My boy was here. He never made it through the door. Rachel intercepted him in the hallway. I heard the whole thing. I heard her voice drop into something soft and sad and poisonous, and I heard her tell my son that it was probably better if he didn't go in. That I'd been agitated, and that seeing him might upset Dad and his state, that the family had been managing things and it was delicate. And then she said the thing that I will never forgive, softer than all the rest. "Daniel, I have to be honest with you. Even now, even like this, he asked me to keep you away. I'm sorry. I didn't want to be the one to tell you. He asked me to keep you away." I was 30 feet down a hallway, awake, desperate, my son closer to me than he'd been in a decade, and I could not call out. I could not make one sound to tell him it was a lie, that I wanted him, that I'd always wanted him. I heard my son go quiet. I heard him say rough, okay, just tell him, and then stop, because what do you say? And I heard him walk away. I heard the elevator. My boy came to say goodbye to his father, and my daughter turned him around at the door with a lie, and I had to lie there and listen to it work. That was the moment, more than any other, that I stopped being sad and started being something else, something cold and patient and very, very awake. Day 8. I started to understand they weren't just dividing what I had. They were reaching for it while I was still warm. Rachel was on the phone with Curtis, my financial advisor of 20 years. I heard her side of it, low and businesslike. She wanted to know what the accounts looked like. She wanted to know how fast things could be moved, if it came to that. She asked whether there was paperwork I could sign now, while I was still able to make things simpler later, and I understood she meant a power of attorney that would hand her the keys to everything I owned, while everyone still believed I was a body that couldn't read. To his credit, Curtis told her these were conversations for the whole family and a lawyer, not a phone call. She didn't like that. I heard it in her voice. But she filed it away and moved on, and so did I, because by then I was filing everything away. I had become a tape recorder in a bed. They thought the lights were off. They never once dropped their voices for the furniture. That night, alone in the dark room, I made a promise to Eleanor. I could feel her there the way you can feel the person you've loved longest. I promised her that if I ever got my voice and my hands back, I would use them to set every piece of this right, quietly, completely, and then I'd find out who was worth keeping. Day 9. They started emptying my house. Rachel mentioned it like it was nothing to her husband in the room. The first carload was done. Some of it to her garage for safekeeping, some of it to the curb. Eleanor's clothes, she said, could go to donation. No point keeping them. Eleanor's clothes. 41 years of my wife, bagged up by a stranger's hands because my daughter couldn't be bothered to wait until I was cold. And then she couldn't find something, and I heard her get frustrated. She was going through my phone. She'd taken it from the drawer by my bed, and she was trying to get into my accounts, my email, the banking app, and she couldn't because she didn't have the passcode. I heard her trying numbers, birthdays, anniversaries, getting them wrong, cursing under her breath at her own dying father for having the gall to lock his phone. What she didn't know was that Maria had quietly handed that phone to me 2 days before, in a moment alone, and asked if I wanted her to keep it safe, and I had moved my one good finger once for yes. Maria had it locked down. Every time Rachel reached for my life, there was Maria already standing in front of it. The outsider, the gold digger, guarding the door my own daughter was trying to break down. Day 10. Through all of it, one person had been talking to me like I was still a person. Maria came every day. She'd pull the chair right up to the bed, take my dead hand in both of hers, and say, "Jean, it's Maria. I'm here. You're not alone." And then she'd just talk. She read me the sports section because she knew I liked baseball. She told me Eleanor would be proud of how hard I was fighting. She had no way of knowing I heard a single word. The doctors had told the whole family the lights were probably off. She talked to me anyway for hours, on the mere chance that some part of me was still in there and might be comforted by a human voice. On day 10, Rachel was in the room doing her performance. "Oh, Daddy, we're all here for you," the sweet voice she put on for whoever was watching. And Maria said quietly, "Rachel, stop, he can hear you. I've watched his face for a week and he can hear you. And you talk about him like he's already gone, and then you hold his hand and call him Daddy, and I won't sit here and watch it." Rachel laughed that small, ugly laugh and said, "You'd say anything to look good." Always working an angle, and she walked out. Maria sat back down and cried, trying to hide it, and said, "I'm sorry, Jean. You deserve so much better than this." And I, who could not move, who could not squeeze her hand to tell her she was the only one, felt one tear run down the side of my face into my ear. The only thing my body would give me. She saw it. Her eyes went wide. "Jean? Jean, can you hear me?" I couldn't answer. But she knew. And here is the thing about Maria. She didn't run to tell the others. She understood. faster than I did. That an old man who knows the truth, sitting across from people who don't know he knows it, is the strongest a powerless man can be. So she kept our secret. She'd squeeze my hand twice when Rachel came through the door, a signal, here she comes, and I'd lie still and dead-eyed and let my daughter believe the lights were off. Day 11. My finger moved. Maria was holding my hand, the way she did, and she said, like she'd said 100 times, into the silence, "If you can hear me, move your finger." And I poured every ounce of everything I had left into it, the way you push against a door that's been stuck your whole life. And it moved, a quarter-inch. She laughed and cried at the same time, and didn't tell a soul. That was the day I stopped being a dying man in their story and started being a quiet man with a plan in mind. The recovery was long, and I'll spare you most of it. The speech came back over weeks, slurred, and then clearer. I want to tell you only about the first word, because it matters. For 2 weeks my mouth made nothing but broken sounds, and the shame of that, for a man who'd spoken plainly his whole life, was its own kind of stroke. Maria came to every session she could. One afternoon the therapist held up a card and asked me to say any word at all, just one, and I looked past him at Maria, sitting in the corner, with her coat still on because she'd come straight from a double shift, and I put everything into it, and the word that came out, cracked but clear, was her name. Maria. She put her hand over her mouth. The therapist asked, "Is that someone's name?" And Maria said, "It's mine." The first word I said coming back, I gave to the one person who never asked me for anything. The leg came back enough to walk with a cane, and the whole time I said nothing about what I'd heard, nothing. When Rachel visited, all sweetness, now that the body had inconveniently kept living, I let her hold my hand. I let her tell me Daniel just couldn't be bothered to come. You know how he is. I filed that away with the rest, and I let her believe she was still in control of me and everything I owned. She wasn't. She just didn't know it yet. The day I got home, before I'd even unpacked, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my son. My hand shook on the phone, and it wasn't the stroke. He answered wary, braced, and I said, "Daniel, it's your father. Before you say anything, just listen." I spent 11 days in a hospital bed listening, and I learned what was done to us. It wasn't you. It wasn't me. I'm so sorry I believed it for 10 years. There was a long silence, and then my grown son made a sound I hadn't heard since he was a boy. We talked for 3 hours, and the whole thing came out from both ends, and it lined up exactly the way that hallway told me it would. We didn't get the 10 years back, but we had whatever was ahead, and we grabbed it with both hands. The second call was to my lawyer, Patricia Vance, who'd handled Eleanor's affairs and mine for years. I told her I needed to change everything, and I needed to do it carefully and quietly, and in a way that could never be argued with. She heard something in my voice and cleared her morning. Here's the part Rachel never saw coming, because she was so sure she still knew exactly who I was. About 2 weeks after I got home, walking with a cane and talking slow, she came by. All warmth, the recovered daddy routine back in full. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table she'd cleared half my life off of, and she held my hand and told me how scared she'd been, how she'd been at my bedside every single day. I let her say it. Then she slid a folder across the table, gentle as anything, and said that with my health, the way it is now, it would be smart to put her on the accounts and sign a power of attorney, just so I never have to worry about the bills. Daddy, just to make it easy on you. The same paper. The one she'd tried to move my dead hand to sign in that hospital bed. She'd brought it to my own table to try again, certain the stroke had left behind a grateful, foggy old man who'd sign whatever his favorite child put in front of him. And I want you to know, I almost laughed. Not out of cruelty, out of something close to wonder that she could sit in Eleanor's kitchen and do it to my face. But I didn't laugh. I'd learned to be quiet a long time ago, and quiet was about to do its finest work. So I patted her hand, and I let my voice shake a little more than it needed to, and I said, "That's so thoughtful, honey. Let me just have my lawyer look it over first. You know how I am with paperwork." And I watched her smile and say, of course, no rush, certain she'd won, certain the signature was as good as done. It wasn't. Everything she was reaching for had already been moved, weeks before, beyond her reach forever. She just got to keep believing she was winning for a few more weeks, which was the most merciful thing I had left to give her, and the most dangerous, because a person who thinks they've won stops being careful about what they say. Now, people think revenge means burning it all down. I want you to understand that I didn't burn anything. I did something much quieter and much harder to recover from. I let Rachel keep believing she'd won, right up until the moment she understood she'd lost it all with her own mouth. Here's what Patricia and I built. First, Eleanor's ring came home. One firmly worded letter citing the value of the item and the manner of its removal, and it was back in my sock drawer within a week. A small thing. It mattered more than all the rest. Then we gathered the proof while it was fresh. Maria gave a written statement, dated and detailed, of everything she'd witnessed across those 11 days, the DNR conversation, the things said over my bed. Dr. Osei's eyes. Notes already reflected the day a family member had pressed about, withdrawing care, and been told it was far too soon. Curtis, my advisor, confirmed in writing the call he'd received, asking how fast funds could be moved. None of it was illegal, exactly. All of it, together, was a portrait, a sealed portrait, in an envelope in Patricia's office, waiting. And then I changed the documents. New medical power of attorney, new financial power of attorney, new will, new trust holding the house. All of it moved out of Rachel's reach and into hands that had earned it. And I did it weeks before I said a single word, so that by the time anyone understood what had happened, it was already done, already signed, already witnessed, already beyond argument. Then I invited the family to Sunday dinner. To celebrate my recovery, I said. They all came. Rachel sweet and triumphant, certain she'd weathered the storm. Daniel and Maria nervous because they knew what I knew. And I'd asked Patricia Vance to come too, and to bring the envelope, and to wait in the next room until I called for her. I waited until everyone was seated at Eleanor's table. Then I stood up, slow with my cane, and I said I had a few things to say. I thanked them all for being there during my time in the hospital. And then I looked at my daughter and I said, I want to thank you, especially Rachel. You stood at my bedside. You held my hand. You called me Daddy. She smiled, pleased. And I said, "It meant a great deal, because I could hear you." The stroke took my voice in my hand. It never touched my ears. For 11 days I heard every word said in that room and that hallway. Every single one. I have never seen a room go so still. I watched the color drain out of my daughter's face. I watched her understand all at once that the body in the bed had been awake the whole time, that there were never any private conversations. She tried, of course. She was always quick. She said it wasn't like that I was confused, medicated. That grief makes people say clumsy things. She reached for my hand across the table, the old move, the climb into Daddy's lap move that had worked on me for 40 years. And I let her take it. And I said gently, "You asked Dr. Osei about a DNR on the 4th day, Rachel. You used the word humane 3 times. Maria stopped you. Did I imagine that too?" And then I called for Patricia. She came in with the envelope, and she sat down at Eleanor's table, and she opened it, and she read it aloud, one piece at a time, in a flat lawyer's voice that was so much worse than shouting. She read Maria's statement, first, dated, detailed, the day Rachel pressed the doctor about a DNR, the things said over my bed. The afternoon she folded my dead hand around a pen to sign a power of attorney to herself. Rachel started to say that statement was biased, that, of course, Maria would say anything, and Patricia simply kept reading, because the next page was Dr. Osei's own notes in the hospital's own record, confirming that a family member had pushed to withdraw care on day 4 and been told it was far too soon. There was no calling the doctor biased. The color started leaving Rachel's face. Then Patricia read Curtis's letter, confirming the call, asking how fast the accounts could be moved while I was still able. Then the record of a wedding ring removed from a sick man's home and recovered by demand letter. Each page landed on that table like a stone, and with every one I watched my daughter get smaller, because there was no clever version of any of it, no reasonable tone that could fold it back into something innocent. Her husband stared at his plate and would not look up, and her own children, the grandchildren she had sat down on day 3 and gently taught to feel relieved that Grandpa was gone, looked at their mother the way no child should ever have to look at a parent. The younger one, my granddaughter, started to cry and said, "But you told us he couldn't hear anything." And nobody answered her, because the answer was sitting at the head of the table with a cane. But it was Daniel I was watching. My son had walked into that dinner not knowing the half of it. He knew we'd been kept apart. He did not know how or by whom, not in detail, not in proof. And he sat there and heard out loud, in front of the whole family, the architecture of 10 stolen years. He heard that the calls were intercepted. He heard the lies that had been carried to him in his sister's mouth. And when Patricia read the line about day 7, the day he'd come to the hospital and been turned away at the door, Daniel stood up. He didn't yell either. "He's my son." He looked at Rachel across our mother's table, and he said, his voice shaking, "I came 7 days ago. I came to say goodbye to him, and you stood in that hallway and told me he didn't want to see me. You told me he asked you to keep me away." His voice broke on it. "I drove home, Rachel. I drove 4 hours, home thinking the last thing my father ever felt about me was that he didn't want me in the room. And he was awake. He heard you do it, and he couldn't stop you." Rachel had no answer for that. "There isn't one." She tried anyway, because she always did. Said it was complicated. Said she was under pressure. Said she was just trying to protect everyone. And the words got smaller and faster, and finally just stopped, because she could feel the whole table had left her, the way a tide goes out all at once. She turned to me, the last move she had, the climb into Daddy's lap move that had worked on me for 40 years, tears coming now, real ones, and she said, "Daddy, please, you're my father. After everything, I'm still your daughter." And I said gently, because I did still love her, and a parent can't stop, "Yes, you are. You will always be my daughter, and the door of my heart will never be fully shut to you, and I will pray for you, and I mean that." But I heard you, Rachel. For 11 days, when you were certain no one could, you told me exactly who you are. The accounts, the house, the will, the proxy, the keys to my life and my death and my name. They were all changed weeks ago, in writing, witnessed, beyond any argument. You didn't lose them because I'm cruel. You lost them because I finally believed you. Then I turned to Maria. I said, "Maria, for 4 years you treated me like family, before you ever had one reason to expect anything in return. You talked to me when they all thought no one was home. You bet I was still a person when everyone else had written me off. And you were right. Everyone at this table called you an outsider. I had to stop a moment. Today I'm making it official, in writing, in front of all of them. You're not the in-law. You're my daughter. And the people I trust with my life and my name and my last breath are you and my son. That's settled now. It's on paper. It's done." Maria cried the way she always seemed to cry in the best moments. Daniel put his arm around her, and I sat back down, and I asked her to pass the potatoes, because I was hungry, and had said what I came to say. Rachel left that night. I won't tell you we never spoke again, because a parent can't fully close that door, and I haven't. But the keys to my life were no longer in her hand, and they never will be again. My son comes to dinner every Sunday now, with Maria and the grandchildren I'd been kept from. Maria still pulls her chair close when we talk, an old habit from a hospital room. Eleanor's ring is back in the drawer where it belongs. And the first weekend I was home, I walked out to my own front yard on my cane, and I pulled the realtors for sale sign out of my lawn with my one good hand, and I left it lying in the grass for a week just so I could look at it from the porch and remember. Some nights, sitting in Eleanor's chair, I think about those 11 days, and I'm not angry anymore. I'm just clear. I think about how close it came. If the stroke had taken my hearing too, I'd have woken up grateful to the daughter who tried to bury me and a stranger to the son who came to say goodbye. I'd have spent my last years loving the wrong people and never known. Most folks never find out. They go their whole lives surrounded by people who don't mean it, and they die thanking the wrong ones. I found out, and once you find out, you can't unknow it, and you owe whatever years you've got left to the ones who passed the test, not the ones who failed it. People think betrayal begins when someone lies to your face. They're wrong. Betrayal begins the moment they decide you'll never hear the truth. My family learned that too late. I heard every word. And once you've heard the truth, You never have to guess again who deserves a seat at your table.